The story The Tale of Despero by Kate DiCamillo is usually categorized as a fairy tale, but when we take a closer look, I think that it becomes evident that many of the themes we've highlighted throughout the semester about heroism are very prominent throughout the story. So our story begins, it's split into 4 different sections. So the first 3 sections introduce us to 3 characters in the story: Despero, the rat Roscurio, and a girl named Meg. And then the 4th section brings all of these characters together and brings us to the story's resolution and tells us some very interesting things about what our author Kate would consider a hero. The first part, Despero's part, I think reflects very closely themes found in our most recent reading of The Magicians, and also of our very first reading, Antigone. The next part, about the rat, Roscurio, reflects an overarching theme we've talked about this semester, which is how someone's intentions influence whether or not we can categorize them as a hero or not a hero. His section also focuses on vengeance, which was specifically important when we read our Nordic tales, and I'm thinking specifically of the saga of the Volsungs. The next section, Meg, she really highlights the themes of honor and shame, which we've talked about all semester, but I'm thinking most specifically about Gawain and the Green Knight, and especially a hero confronting their shame and how that influences whether you can be a hero or not. So, to begin, Despero is a mouse, and he's a little different than the other mice. He doesn't really like normal mice things. He really likes music, and this reminds me a lot of Quentin in our story of the Magicians, because Quentin, even though he's really smart and he's got all these things going for him, he's just not happy with his everyday life and the things he's supposed to be doing, like going to college, and he's thrilled to find out that there's an opportunity for him to go to this school of magic. And in a similar way, Despero finds a lot of solitude in music. But this leads him into some trouble because one day, I forgot to mention that all of these characters live in a castle. So they all live in a castle together. So it's the same setting. One day, he's out looking for music and he comes across the king and the princess playing these beautiful sounds. And the number 1 rule of mice is not to reveal yourself to humans. So by accident, they notice him and he speaks with them about the music and he breaks the number 1 mice rule. Horrible! But then his father finds out about this incident and calls a mouse council, and the council decides that he's risked it too many times, he's too different, he doesn't fit in, they're going to send him to the dungeon to be killed. And this is where the story reminds me of Antigone, because just as Creon sends his own niece to her death, Despero's father is sending his own son to his death because he believes so strongly in the power of the institution. Creon believes very strongly in his own power and the power of government, but his father believes in the Mouse Council and the castle so much that anything that would break those standards is considered horrible. So Despero is sent away. This is where he meets a rat, Roscurio, who lives in the dungeon of the castle. And he's also a little bit different. He doesn't really like the darkness down there like rats are supposed to. They're supposed to wreak havoc for all the prisoners, do all these horrible things. But Roscurio is like, I don't really want to do that. I really just like the sunshine. And so one day he goes off on a little adventure on his own, and he actually wanders upon the dining area of the royal family. And he crawls up onto the chandelier in order to get like a better view and see the light, and this brings him happiness. But he falls into the queen's soup, and the queen is so startled that she dies. Horrible, horrible. So he goes back, he returns to the dungeon, but he never forgets the way the princess looked at him when he fell from the chandelier. And all he remembers is the look of disgust on her face. And this seeds in Roscurio a deep desire to get vengeance against her for the way that she reacted to him and his persona. He feels so rejected. And I think that really reminds me of our Nordic tales where they all are trying to get vengeance and preserve their family name. But the key difference here is that Roscurio's intentions are selfish. He's not getting vengeance for his family. He's not getting vengeance for anyone else. He's getting this vengeance for himself because of the own disgust that the princess put onto him. And also, Roscurio goes out and sees the light and leaves the dungeon where he's supposed to be for his own selfish personal reasons, which are just that he wants to see the light. There's no greater act of heroism or bravery that he reflects. So at this point in the story, I think it's safe to say that he's not a hero. But stay tuned, because that does change. The next section focuses on a girl, Mig, who was sold into slavery by her father for a chicken, a cigarette, and a tablecloth, which is horrible in itself. But her story really reflects themes of honor and shame that we've discussed all semester. But here's the thing. So she's sold to be a servant, and this horrible man she's sold to hits her sometimes, really horrible. And then one day she sees the royal family walking about along the town, and she decides that she would really love to be a princess. And I think that this really highlights the way you can be shamed and honored. She sees the princess as, she has all these servants, she has these beautiful dresses, people are pushing her in carriages, and it's a privileged position, whereas Mig is a servant. She feeds people, she gets hit by this guy who bought her, really horrible situation. But a main difference between Gawain and her is that Gawain's shame is confronted. He wears the girdles proudly so that he can change. He can change what he's been shamed for. And I think this mostly should reflect Mig's father, who should feel immense shame for selling his daughter, and he's actually is taken to the dungeon for this because slavery is illegal. So it would be illegal to sell your daughter into slavery. But I think that at this point in the story, it's safe to say that we know this is going to come to a head somewhere relating to shame and honor, but it hasn't brought us any act of greater heroism yet. In part 4, so Mig is actually taken back to the castle because the king and the princess find her and slavery is illegal, so they say, you can come back to the castle, work for us, and be a servant. But Mig is a horrible servant. It's just not her calling. It's not what she's meant for. So she very soon gets given what is considered to be the worst job, which is bringing food to the prisoners in the dungeon. And when she's walking down there to comfort herself, she kind of talks about how she really wants to be the princess, and she envisions a life of all this glamour and privilege and things she doesn't currently have, and that gives her some solitude. And the rat, Roscurio, hears this, and he thinks this is a perfect time to fulfill his plans for vengeance. And so he convinces Mig that if she kidnaps the princess at knife point, that she'll be able to be the princess, as she'll be gone. And if she brings her to the dungeon, there's nothing they can do about it. But this is still selfish, because Roscurio knows when he brings her to the dungeon, that's when he'll be able to get his vengeance against the princess. So, still not bringing about any change in his intentions to that we can consider him a hero. But here's where our hero does come in. Despero is also in the dungeon, and he hears of this grand scheme. And he hates this because he is in love with the princess. So he decides he's going to warn her. And he gets on the empty prisoner's tray in a plan to get carried back up to the main castle and be able to warn her. This doesn't quite go as he plans, though, and he actually ends up falling asleep. When he wakes up, he finds that the princess has already been kidnapped. So he's failed. He's failed. Our hero has failed us. But in an extreme act of bravery, he goes back down to the dungeon and he actually battles Roscurio with a sewing needle, or as he says, his knight's lance. And he wins. And Mig has a change of heart, and him, Mig, and the princess all return to the castle. And this is where I think everything comes to a point where we're able to say what our author would consider a hero. So the princess, even though she's been through this whole horrible situation, decides she is going to forgive the rat, and she actually gives Roscurio free run of the castle so he can see all the sunshine he wants and he'll never have to live in the dungeon ever again. And she returns Mig to her father, who feels so bad, has really confronted his shame over his time in the dungeon, that he decides he's going to treat Mig like a princess for the rest of her life. So this is very similar to Gawain. Now, finally, he has confronted his shame and decided to change his actions for the better. And Despero, even though he's in love with the princess, now him and the princess have become good friends. So even though it didn't work out exactly how he planned, he still got something good. But I think the end of our story tells us that the author really just thinks a hero is someone who does the right thing. Despero tries to warn her, but the princess, I think, really embodies the true hero of the story, as she forgives everyone and she returns Mig to her father, and Mig's father finally does the right thing by accepting his daughter and deciding that he should actually cherish his family and his life, and it all comes to a point. And I think that this is the relevant part of the story for my own life. So this is the first year I've lived in a house, and I've tried really hard this semester and last semester to always be doing the right thing, you know, like need to keep our downstairs clean, I need to keep our room clean, I need to keep myself out of like my roommates' spaces if they want their alone time. We have a cat, so we've really tried this semester to take as best care for her as we can because she can't do it for herself. So I think just always trying to do the right thing is really what the author is highlighting. And I think that's especially relevant to my own life because I really like living a life where you have a lot of fun and you do all these great things, but also it's really important to keep in mind that sometimes there is a right and wrong decision, and sometimes you have to make choices reflecting those decisions. Like, should I do my math homework or should I watch TV with the rest of my roommates? Obviously, I should do my math homework and then go watch TV with the rest of my roommates, and those decisions just become harder and harder as you're on your own and further away from some type of structure, and especially living in a house, that becomes harder and harder and harder and harder. But I think that's my main takeaway from the story, and I hope you enjoyed my summary in relation to our themes of heroism as much as I enjoyed reading it and making those connections.